This presentation will introduce you to the genre of literacy narratives. To begin, we'll define a narrative. Narratives are basically stories that are told from your perspective as the writer and the speaker. Of all of the different types of essays you'll write, all of the different types of writing that you'll do, narratives are closest to spoken discourse. Basically, if you were to take the story you're telling around the campfire and put it into writing, what you have is a narrative. These are in first person, they're based on personal experience, and they're primarily subjective documents, sort of on that spectrum from objective to subjective. They fall almost entirely on the subjective side of things. You're surrounded by narratives every day, from your Sunday sermon to the tall tales that your buddies tell you. These are all narratives. The only difference is that what you're going to do for unit number 1 is to write a narrative, and some special considerations for rhetorical situation must be made when writing a narrative that might be different than if you were to be telling the story out loud. A literacy narrative is a specific kind of narrative. What you are doing in a literacy narrative is recounting the story of your experience with reading, writing, or communication in general. Generally, these literacy narratives focus in on a specific event or a specific instance, an epiphany moment in your life that you think changed the way that you think about reading and writing. And that's what you'll be expounding upon in your Unit 1 deliverable essay. So, to choose this topic, the first thing you're going to do is brainstorm about your lifelong experience with reading and writing. And choose one specific event that you can explore in significant detail and upon which you can reflect. You aren't trying to summarize your entire life. You're not trying to summarize every book you've ever read or every story that you've written. You're focusing on one particular event. Consider it a snapshot. And you don't necessarily have to fill in all the details for the events that happened around it. Some examples that might inspire you to think about these instances of literacy might be an early memory of reading and writing, something you recall very vividly from your childhood, your relationship with the individual or the teacher who taught you to read and write, an event related to literacy that you found to be humorous, and you can also think about how writing instant messages, text messages, email, Facebook messages has changed your relationship with communication and with writing. Especially if you're old enough to remember a time before all of that stuff, and you can remember how we used to communicate. The change is pretty marked, and that might be fruitful material for investigation in a literacy narrative. What is the rhetorical situation of a literacy narrative? And we'll go through the Papio matrix here. The purpose questions would be, why are you telling the story? Why does it matter? Why would someone be interested in it? And how does the story fit into your larger life narrative, especially as it relates to your education? Narratives only work if they're interesting and if people listen to them. You don't want to write a narrative that's analogous to someone who sits in the coffee shop and tells a long-winded story that no one cares about. Use sort of the same bellwether for this essay. For your audience, are your readers going to relate to your story? It's important that narratives are relatable, that they show you as a human being with similar characteristics and traits to the people who are listening or reading your story. How much background information do you have to give? Remember, you're not going to tell the entire story of your life, so you have to determine what that balance is. And also, how much are you willing to share with strangers? This is ultimately a public document, even though I will be the only one reading it. Some people don't feel comfortable sharing intimate details of their life, and you should consider, how you feel with openness. Format, obviously you're just writing this as an essay, but one thing to consider is whether or not to use dialogue, like a story would use, how long your narrative should be, and how do you use elements of format and structure to reflect authenticity. For evidence, how much detail should you use? How much do you need to put into your narrative to make it believable? And is it okay to invent details? This is something to consider. If you're telling the story of literacy in kindergarten, you're obviously not going to remember every little detail of your kindergarten class. So you have to consider how much evidence you have to invent and whether or not that's ethical. Finally, organization. What organizational strategy should you use for the narrative? Natural narratives go from beginning, middle, and end, but you don't have to follow that motif. The advantage to writing a narrative instead of sitting down and telling it to someone is that you can use more sophisticated organizational schema. Okay, getting started. Things to think about. Think about the setting. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? And what do you taste? Why are these important for a literacy narrative? Well, they add authenticity. If you can describe setting with great detail, your audience is more likely to believe that you aren't making it up. What about people? As you're drafting or brainstorming, write down the name of everyone that is somehow relevant to your story, everyone who participates in your story. And then annotate that. Describe each person in a paragraph. Construct some dialogue. Again, this adds to authenticity. Think about what actually happened. Draw out a timeline. Make an outline of events. That way you won't get confused when you translate to essay form. Think about the significance of the narrative. Why does it matter? Why are you writing this? And because you're required to do so isn't enough. How has it impacted you in the long term? What did you learn from this? How has it been applicable to your experience at college? Finally, think about a title. One of the most important pieces of a story is its title. Come up with something descriptive and creative. You have to keep in mind that the title is often the gatekeeper for a story or for an essay. If you don't have an interesting title, or if your title doesn't capture the eye of the reader, there's no incentive for that reader to keep reading. So make sure that you put some thought into your title and make sure that it fits the actual narrative that you're presenting to the audience.